Welcome to Ranting and Raving. Funny enough, this video is actually inspired by somebody in the comment section. Um, I always try to make an effort to respond to comments. I don't expect the channel to get super big, but if it ever does, obviously I won't be able to keep up with it then, but it's probably not going to happen. So if you guys do comment, I will respond, and for the most part, I don't expect everybody to agree with me, but do try to make points and don't put words in my mouth. Um, and definitely, if you're responding to something, actually respond to what was said. You know who you are. Actually, you said you're not going to watch this anymore, so you probably don't know who you are, and that's fine. So anyway, this video was actually inspired by somebody in the comments. It was saying I was being unfair to Jameis, and that I'm paraphrasing and I'm being slightly hyperbolic, but Jameis, his interceptions are comparable to Brees and Peyton Manning, and he won Rookie of the Year, and he was made a Pro Bowl, and he was just in a bad team in Tampa. I mean, he's clearly on a Hall of Fame trajectory. The last part is the hyperbolic thing that was never said, but it was implied in the context of what was written. And number one, no, I actually haven't crapped on Jameis at all. I've actually been pretty optimistic about what he could do. But beyond that, the idea here is to be realistic. So as you can see here, we have some of Drew Brees' stats, really all of the what I think are the relevant stats to this discussion for Brees while he was in New Orleans. So what we have here is now you can see in yellow, these are outlier seasons. So these are not going to be included at the end where we're actually going to try to project out, what I think is an optimistic view of what Jameis could do production-wise this year and more of a pessimistic view. And we're looking at Brees to start just to compare. So Brees' greatest season, nearly 5,500 yards, 46 touchdowns, 14 interceptions, but only at a 2.1 rate. So that means he threw the ball a ton. 657 passes, crazy completion percentage, unbelievably productive. 2011 offense, one of, if not the greatest offense of all time. Threw his most in 2010, that was 22, but had 19 in 2012, 17 in 2014, 15 in 2016. But then we look at 8 and 5 and 17 and 18. That's really where Drew started to really shift, as you can see here, from the prolific big play passer, which Drew was at one point in time, but super high pass attempts, lots of big plays, super productive offense, and really shifted to more of a game manager, ball control quarterback. Still pretty productive in 17 and 18. Fell off a cliff in 19 and 20 production wise. That's for a lot of reasons. Played fewer games. Is definitely a big part of that. His body was just getting hurt, getting shot. Ruiz tried to kill him. All of those things are factors. All of those are components of what happened. And so these yellow years, and we're going to do the same thing with Jameis, we're taking those out. So I'm not going to include those in what we're looking at. But the other thing we're going to be looking at here is sack rate, because it does matter. But the big stats, just again, framing this within the context of Jameis, who we're going to look at here next, is his interceptions per year, his touchdowns per year, his yards, and his completion percentage. And when we actually look at Jameis, so we can see again, 2020, he appeared in four, basically didn't appear, had a couple of snaps. Um, Oops, wrong slide. Um, you know, 2020 and really even 2021. 2021, he only played in 7 games. It's a huge outlier season for him for a bunch of reasons. We're not going to include that in any type of projection. Now, his best year and worst year, in a way, was 2019. That's the notorious 30-30 year. Now, one of only a few quarterbacks ever to pass for over 5,000 yards, 30 touchdowns, 30 interceptions, the notorious 30-30. Now, here's the thing that I really do want to point out with Jameis right off the bat. If we go back up to Drew, look at all these completion percentages. really, 2012 completion percentage is Drew's worst year. That was at 63, and his next worst year was 2006, his first year. Every other year, he's above 65%. Jameis has never been above 65%. His best completion percentage was just under 65. That was in 2018. He only played 11 games, and most of the time he's at or below 60%. Again, 2020 he was in 4 games. He threw 11 passes. We're not counting it. Last year, we're not really looking this as the projection, but this 59% is in alignment with most of the rest of his career. That actually explains why when you look at, the yards per game, when you look at the touchdown percentage, which other than, like some of Drew's most prolific years, are actually pretty comparable. Why is Jameis so different as a quarterback? And the difference really is that completion percentage. He's on average completing almost 10% less passes. So even if you have those turnovers being different, and actually being, again, outside of the 30-30 year, relatively comparable. He didn't throw a ton more interceptions than Drew, but had more fumbles, which isn't on here, but he did have more fumbles. And the bigger part is when you're completing 10% less of your passes, your offense is off the field, you're off schedule, it kills drives, you lose games. So it's the combination of being a fairly high turnover player. Again, we're going to discount that 30-year to a degree because it is an outlier. The same way 46 touchdowns was for Drew, and even 22 interceptions was for Drew. So do I think he's going to do that every year? No. I think he's probably going to be somewhere between 12 and 18 interceptions because that's historically where he's been. The problem is he's only completing 58, 59, 60% of his passes. And if you're going to do that, you have to be a lower turnover player, or you have to compensate for it with a very high number of big plays. Now, you also need a good defense to give you more possessions, to give you more opportunities, to give you better field position. These are all things that he didn't have in Tampa Bay. And they're all important variables when you're wanting to look at, well, what can we expect from Jameis? And all of those things do directly impact offensive production. So all of those are relevant. Now let's just go ahead and take a look here. Here's Drew and Jameis together, but here's projecting Jameis, and here's basically what I did. Drew's numbers here are really just for comparison to kind of, okay, where does he compare against, an all-time great quarterback? Can he compare against that? So we have the optimistic view looking at this year. This is really to this year's roster. This is not to his career, but this would be I honestly, I think this year's roster would probably be the best team Drew Brees ever played on. Like the 2011 team is the most fun, the most interesting, the most dynamic, the most impressive. But roster-wise, just talent top to bottom, high-end potential, this team is better than the 2018 team, with the caveat being Ruiz. If they had to figure out right guard. If right guard is as big as a disaster as it was the last couple of years, just none of this projection is going to be optimistic. But if they get that figured out, roster-wise, this would probably be the best team Drew ever played on, and you're going to perform better with a better roster. See Cam Newton's MVP season. Look at their starting field position for that year, and you'll understand why they had a great offense, because Cam Newton was never a high-level quarterback at any point in his career, but he was exceptional in the red zone. Just because of his skill set and the roster, but really Cam's skill set, he's made for the red zone. And because of their starting field position, they got in the red zone more, and they were, I believe, if I remember right, they were the league's top scoring offense that year. And this brings us to what we're looking at for Jameis. So basically what I did is, for looking at the optimistic and the pessimistic, because these are just their averages for these years, ignoring these outlier seasons. So these last two for Jameis and these last two for Drew, I took out. They're outlier seasons. They're not representative of what the player really is for a variety of reasons. Injury, games played, Jameis being a backup, etc. The rest of their career is on the table here. So obviously we see the big gap in completion percentage. We see a big gap in yards, a big gap in touchdowns. Jameis throws 4 more interceptions a year, which isn't a ton. Again, it's not just that he's not throwing 25 picks a year, although 4 picks is a meaningful amount. That's basically an additional pick every 4 games. That does matter. Jameis's issue has always been the binging. Those picks tend to come in bunches. But the bigger issue has always been for him, it's the completion percentage plus the interceptions plus the fumbles. A lot of that comes down to decision making, but a lot of it comes down to mechanics and execution. So, if we're going to take the optimistic view, so Jameis's best year completion percentage-wise was at 64.6%. I do think Jameis can throw 1% higher than his best year. Now, he only played 11 games that year, but I do think with Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry and even Olave, who's good at who was good in college at making contested catches, Alvin Kamara, who's very good at these things. I do think that these guys, and let me just fix my face right here. I do think that these guys can help him throw for a higher completion percentage. I think being in a better offense, Pete's going to run some version of Sean Payton's offense. I do think that's going to help as well. The 14-2 or 14-3 or 15-3, whatever the hell it was last year. Yes, it's right in front of me. I'm an idiot. 14-3, like that touchdown interception ratio from last year, it gets talked about way too much in both directions, but really it wasn't representative of the level of play last year. He had that 5 touchdown game that was he passed for like 90 yards. There were several interceptions that were dropped. The touchdown pass to Callaway, the 2 of them, the one against the Patriots and the Hail Mary at the end of the half, like both of those could have easily been picks, and this is really close to a 50-50 ratio. And that's not to say that like Jameis was awful. It's just saying like he wasn't 14-3 good and project that out 2.5 times, and he's throwing for nearly 40 touchdowns and only 9 interceptions. Like no, that's not the type of year he had. He wasn't playing that well. The roster around him wasn't that good either, but he was not playing that well. He completed 59% of his passes. Like chill in both directions. But again, completion percentage, I think optimistically, I think he can hit 65, 66%. And if he's hitting that, Jameis is going to have a really good year. And I think with this roster, the way the team is set up, the skill set of the guys around him, you put players around him that'll help when he is a little off target, when he doesn't make a perfect throw, which, again, Drew Brees is there's only a couple of guys in the history of the game that were that accurate. So it's going to happen. It's normal. What Drew did was abnormal. Not just to have that accuracy, but have those production levels with that accuracy. 71% completion and 5,500 yards. That doesn't happen. So 65, 66% I think is hittable. If he gets that, I think it's completely reasonable to think he's going to be 4,000 plus, 4,200, 4,300 yards, 35, 36 touchdowns. I think he 12.6, and I did a lot of these off of a ratio, basically looking at okay, if he's about 10% better of a player because of the roster around him, 10 to 30%, depending on the stat, because some things get weighted differently. Like if I go 30% better on completion percentage or yards, it's going to completely screw it up. So I was selective with the math, but trying to make a reasonable projection, something that I think is hittable in the hypothetical scenario where Jameis is his best self. So around 13 picks, I think it's possible. I think he'll probably be a little higher than that. But again, you look at his career, 11, 14, 15. Now keep in mind, he threw 11 in 13 games and 14 in 11 games and then 30 in 16 games. So this does not project super well. But he did only throw 15 in 16 games. So in a better offense, with a better defense, with some of the new mentality, is it possible that he throws fewer interceptions overall? It's possible. So that's the optimistic view. And the hope here is that he's closer to this 25 sack rate than this 47 sack rate, which, by the way, does not get talked about enough from that 30-30 year that Jameis had. He was constantly under duress. And I know they had a great offensive line the next year with Tom Brady, which, again, a lot of that roster with Tom Brady, it wasn't 1-to-1. They made a lot of changes and improvements. And Jameis was a part of some of those sacks, but Jameis was not the reason he got hit with 47 sacks. That is a Bruce Arians special. And that absolutely contributed to him throwing 30 interceptions. So if they can be around 25 sacks, which again, that's the biggest issue here. Solve the Ruiz problem. If the rest of the O-line is healthy, I think all of this is at least possible. The pessimistic view is he is who we thought he was. That his career averages, ignoring outlier years, are pretty much who he is as a player. 61-ish% completion, around 4,000 yards, but 24-ish touchdowns, 18-ish interceptions, 35-ish sacks, some of them from holding the ball too damn long or just doing dumb things. And I think they can actually win with this player. But if he's throwing 24 touchdowns to 18 interceptions, you're looking at an 8-9 win ceiling because you're giving the ball away way too damn often. If you're looking at 34-14, this could be, if you're looking at 36-13-ish, this is a Super Bowl contender. This is where the question is with Jameis. Can he be this best version of himself? They've put the pieces around him. I'm not kidding. I think this would probably be the best roster Drew Brees ever played with. We see Drew Brees' numbers here. Can Jameis, with the best roster he's ever played with by miles and miles, not be so inconsistent and go on turnover binges? That's the question. If the completion percentage goes up and the interceptions just stay relative to his average, especially if we factor out that 30 interception year, 14-11, 18-15, 11-14 happening in shortened seasons. He probably would have thrown closer to 20 in both of those years. But if that 20 can become 16, 15, 14, and the touchdowns stay up where they should be with this roster, he could have a very good year, and he can reset his career and be the guy that was the number 1 overall pick. If he can't do that with this roster, then we know what he is as a player. It makes him one of the most interesting storylines in the NFL this year, and this is where I'm at with Jameis. I think both of these are possible. I don't know which is more likely, but with this roster that's put around him, I think he has a real chance at hitting those optimistic numbers, and it could be a really fun year. Tell me what you guys think in the comments.